Good morning. I'd like to start off with a Beatles medley now. I'm just kidding. My book. Well, I struggled when Ted invited me to come and talk to you about the power of storytelling. I'm not a public speaker. I tried to take some cues from David before, and I'll never remember it all. But I'm a writer. So I thought the best thing I could do would be to write a story about TEDx and share it with you about the power of storytelling. I have a story to tell, and I hope you'll listen. Once upon a time, there was a slightly nervous storyteller and writer sitting on a stage in front of a large audience. The storyteller's name was Joe, and he wanted people to know about the power of storytelling, but he wasn't sure how to tell them. Joe wanted to make the people believe in the power of stories. He wanted to reveal to them that a lot of what we know as humans is based on stories. In our modern world, it's not just about gathering more and more data. Joe wondered how other storytellers would do it. How would they share the power of stories with their audience? The storyteller thought, maybe if I share a story about my family, maybe that would help. So Joe told them that he was raised in a strong German household where his father was a true patriarch and ruled with an iron hand. And then Joe told them a story about how he handled fear. It was a story about him and his brothers when they were boys, always getting into trouble and often getting spanked for it. Now you must know that these spankings in his house were never out of anger or rage. They were more of the crime and punishment type, where his dad was the judge and jury. Spankings were formal, organized, and delivered with a certain amount of ceremony. Picture a little herald coming out with a scroll and a long trumpet announcing, "Hear ye, the spankings shall commence." His dad always asked, "Okay, who wants to go first?" Joe was always the first to volunteer. He got spanked first every time until one day his dad asked him, "Joseph, why do you always ask to go first?" And with tears in his eyes, he pouted, "So I can watch the others." Joe never got to go first again, and his dad made it on the cover of one of his books. Maybe a story like that would convince them that stories make us more real and personal. And then the storyteller thought, I'll use science to convince them. I'll show them how the brain of the person telling a story can synchronize with those that are listening. Joe wondered if they would even believe him if he talked about neurocoupling and the different parts of the brain and how they sync up. What if he explained that as a speaker speaks and the listener listens, their brains are actually connecting through individual neurons? These connections create a mutual experience of pain, joy, or even disgust. Suddenly, Joe hoped that the audience wasn't in pain or possibly disgusted by his story. Then the storyteller had a brilliant idea. Joe would talk about making money. Everyone could relate to that. Yeah, he'd show them how stories make money. So he told them about a research project on eBay where people bought some worthless junk. They then turned around and resold the stuff, but instead of typical item descriptions, they wrote personal stories for each item. They even used professional writers, and what happened next was amazing. The junk that they bought for $1.25 a piece on eBay was resold for $36.12. They made a profit of $8,000 through stories. Though his argument seemed compelling, the storyteller still wondered if the audience believed. He could have sworn he heard snoring. It was time to make things even more personal. He would prove to them that stories were powerful by sharing one of his most cherished secrets. It was the secret that revealed how he created his own stories. Writing a story is at once the most empowering, creative experience and the darkest emptiness you may ever feel. Joe called this writing in the void. The void was the silent place where thoughts gathered, both bright and beautiful or dark and sinister. It was a place where the words formed and linked together, forming wonderful inspired sentences or worthless chunks of wasted babble. His stories were conceived and born in the void. The storyteller paused for a minute to catch his breath. Whew. That last stuff was pretty heavy. He hoped he didn't bum the audience out too much. It was getting late, and Joe was about to get the hook from TEDx. There was time for one more story. One story that might convince the crowd that stories were powerful, important, and open to everyone. But it had to come from the heart. This was a story that began a few years ago when things were really bad in Detroit and across the country. The storyteller wondered, why are such bad things happening to such good people? From that tiny question, Joe created a story about an old urban legend, the Nain Rouge. He was a little red dwarf, a harbinger of doom. Suddenly all the bad things in the area had a face and a voice. Evil was now embodied by this little devil. Now with this new story, he had an explanation of why bad things happen to good people. Joe had created a folk tale that encapsulated the spirit of the people in the Detroit area, the spirit of hope and grit and perseverance, the spirit that says to keep fighting even though you're down and out, the fighting spirit that says evil is all around us, so what the hell are we going to do about it? The story was no longer his. It belonged to everybody. The power of storytelling is an expanding force. It is a flame that can be passed on to many others, ever increasing without losing anything of itself. It was time to say goodbye, and Joe had done his best. He hoped that the people could see how powerful storytelling could be. So he left them with this parting thought. Stories have the power to change the world. We all have a story to tell. We are writing our own stories every day with every encounter and every interaction, whether we want to or not. It doesn't matter where we are in life. It's never too late to acknowledge this fact that we are all storytellers. Our stories are important. Our stories have meaning. Our stories need to be shared. So tell your story.